Welcome to the debate.
Good to be here.
Today we are dissecting the engine of human progress, basically the way we think. We are looking at the art of questioning assumptions, but we're going a lot deeper than the usual corporate cliches about, thinking outside the box. We are debating the actual mechanism of insight itself.
It is a fundamental tension that defines pretty much every problem we try to solve. On one side, you have the view that insight is a construction project. You're building a sturdy tower of logic on a solid foundation. On the other side, which is my view, insight is actually a demolition project. You have to blow up the foundation to build something actually new.
And that is the core disagreement today. Is true critical thinking about order, discipline, and connecting the dots of established knowledge? Or is it, as you suggest, about chaos, destabilization, and the refusal to accept any premise as true?
I am arguing for the latter. I'm championing what the literature calls innovative thinking. To me, the disciplined approach often just makes us more efficient at doing the wrong things. We need the discomfort of the Socratic Method. We need to disrupt the status quo, even if it's messy.
And I am here to defend adaptive thinking. I believe that creativity isn't magic. It is a mechanical, disciplined process of synthesizing what we already know to solve real-world problems. We need frameworks. We need efficiency. We need to define the box before we can even think about what is outside of it.
Well, let's test that structure then. You just mentioned that creativity is mechanical.
I did, yes.
That sounds incredibly unromantic for a topic that's usually associated with art and genius. I mean, you are reducing Mozart and Einstein to a filing cabinet.
In a way, yeah, I am. And I think the romanticization of creativity is actually harmful, because it makes people think they can't do it unless they are struck by lightning. If we look at the source material, particularly the breakdown of how the brain processes information, creativity is really just an inventory management issue. It is the logical result of having a robust collection of knowledge and memories.
So you think it's just about having more data points?
It is about having the right data points and the logic to connect them. Let's look at the analogy provided in the text: the coconut, the rice, and the egg. It's a perfect illustration of my point. Imagine you are starving. You have these three raw ingredients in front of you. If you have no dots to connect, no prior knowledge, what happens?
You stare at them. Maybe you crack a tooth on the raw rice.
Exactly. You might drink the raw egg and look at the coconut in confusion, treating it like a rock. It is quite literally a disaster. But if you have memories, if you have the dots of your father cracking a coconut, or your mother boiling rice, or a chef frying an egg, your brain performs a synthesis. You boil the rice in coconut water. You fry it with the egg, and you add the coconut flakes.
And wow, you have a meal.
You have a meal. But notice what happened there. You didn't invent a new element of the periodic table. You didn't hallucinate a cheeseburger. You took existing knowns and arranged them in a new sequence based on established rules of cooking. That is critical thinking. It requires structure. It requires the 5-step process outlined by the TED-Ed and Alex material. You formulate the question, gather information, apply it, consider the implications, and explore other hues.
I don't deny that the fried rice is better than the raw egg. But here is where your inventory theory falls apart for me. You are assuming that the ingredients you've been given are the only ones that exist. You're assuming the goal is to make dinner.
Well, if you are hungry, that is the goal.
Is it? What if the coconut is actually a seed for a tree that could feed you for a lifetime, but you cooked it because your process said to make dinner? My position is that simply connected existing dots traps you in a cycle of iteration. You are just making slightly better versions of the same mistakes. We need to generate new dots.
New dots sounds nice, but where do they come from if not from observation and reality? You can't just conjure them out of thin air.
They come from the executive network of the brain, but not in the way you think. The University of British Columbia study from 2009 is crucial here. They found that this specific part of the brain, the part responsible for complex, high-level problem solving, lights up when we daydream, when we drift, when we aren't gathering information or formulating anything.
You mean when we are distracted? You are arguing that the key to solving a crisis is to zone out?
I mean, when we are untethered. The study suggests that to solve the hardest problems, you don't need more focus. You need less. You need to allow the mind to wander into the unknown. Your 5-step process is great for a computer. It's an algorithm. But humans aren't algorithms. We need to dismantle the box, not just tidy it up. If we just process information like a computer, which is a comparison you seem very fond of, we miss the biological reality that our best ideas often come when we stop trying to control the output.
I think we need to ground this, because dismantling the box and daydreaming sound profound, but in practice it often just leads to chaos. This brings us to the first major clash in the material, which is the nature of creativity itself, specifically Michael Curtin's adaptation innovation theory.
I'm glad you brought up Curtin. It's a very useful framework. He distinguishes between those who try to do things better, which is you, and those who try to do things differently.
Precisely. And I am arguing that civilization is built on the backs of the adapters. Let's take the cat litter problem mentioned in the Sprouts analysis. It's mundane, but it's a perfect example of how problem-solving actually works in the real world versus how we wish it worked.
It is a classic example.
So the problem is simple. Cat litter smells, and it tracks all over the house. The adaptive thinker, my approach, looks at the constraints. They analyze the chemical properties of the clay. They figure out how to increase the particle size to stop the tracking. They add an antibacterial agent or a tropical scent to mask the odor.
Right. You make the sand smell like papayas.
And the consumer is happy. The problem is solved efficiently. This is practical progress.
But is it? I would argue you haven't solved the problem at all. You've masked the symptom. You have created a slightly better way to have feces in your house.
This is where the innovative thinker steps in. They don't look at the litter box and ask how to make this smell better. They ask a fundamental question. Why on earth are we letting a cat poop in a box of sand in our living room?
It is a valid question, but the answers usually lead to absurdity.
Not absurdity, divergence. The material suggests the innovative thinker comes up with radical solutions. Maybe cat diapers. Maybe a genetic modification so the cat doesn't produce waste in the same way. Or perhaps robot cats. And this is exactly where the innovative approach fails the reality test. Cat diapers? Really? Imagine the implications, which is step 4 of the critical thinking process I mentioned earlier. You have to consider the long-term consequences. If you invent cat diapers, you are now spending your life chasing a cat to change a diaper. You have created a new, significantly worse problem because you refuse to work within the existing constraints.
You are applying judgment way too early. This is the death of creativity. You hear cat diaper and your judge and jury brain slams the gavel and says, guilty of inefficiency.
Because it isn't efficient.
But you miss the bridge. Maybe cat diapers don't work, but the process of questioning the litter box leads you to the idea of a self-cleaning mechanism. It leads you to the automatic robot litter boxes we see today, which are a massive industry. You don't get to the robot box by adding perfume to the sand. You get there by visiting the impossible idea of the diaper first. You have to risk the failure to find the breakthrough.
But notice what you just did. You eventually came back to a box. You admitted the robot is a robot litter box. You eventually had to adapt the solution to reality. My point is that the adaptive thinker gets there faster, cheaper, and with less mess. We don't need to hallucinate a cat in a diaper to make progress.
I think hallucinate is a bit harsh. I call it vision. But our disagreement on the cat litter is actually a symptom of a deeper disagreement about how we ask questions.
Agreed. You want to question the premise, and I want to solve the equation.
And that brings us to the grandfather of questioning, Socrates. You were championing this 5-step process: formulate, gather, apply, implications, explore. It sounds very corporate, very tidy.
It is effective. Step 1 is understand and formulate the question. If you don't do that, you are just wandering. As the Makel analysis points out, critical thinking requires you to act like a judge and jury in a court of law. You have to weigh the evidence, analyze the sources, and crucially reach a verdict.
But a verdict implies the trial is over. A verdict stops the thinking. The Socratic Method, which I advocate for, suggests the trial should never really end. The TED-Ed analysis of Socrates is fascinating here. Socrates wasn't feared because he had the answers. He was feared because he dismantled everyone else's answers. He claimed to know nothing. That is a direct opposite of your gathering dots.
And look where it got him. He was executed.
We will get to the hemlock in a moment. But first, look at the effectiveness of the method in the dialogue with Euthydemus. This is a perfect example of why your step one is dangerous. Euthydemus thinks he has completed step one. He thinks he knows what justice is.
He defines it as not lying and not stealing. That seems like a reasonable working definition for a society. If we don't have that definition, we have anarchy.
It is reasonable until you poke it. Socrates asks, is it unjust for a general to deceive a hostile army? Euthydemus pauses. He realizes his definition, his framework is flawed. So he revises. Okay, it's unjust to lie to friends, but acceptable to lie to enemies.
See? He is refining his definition. That is the adaptive process at work. He is improving the litter.
But Socrates isn't done. He then asks, what if a commander lies to his own troops to boost their morale when they are disheartened and about to be slaughtered? Now Euthydemus is stuck. He becomes, as the text describes, despondent. He realizes he doesn't actually know what justice is. He realizes his dots were illusions.
And that is my problem with the Socratic method as a practical tooling. It leads to despondency. It leads to paralysis by analysis. The A-Look source cites a 2014 survey of 400 employees showing that 91% believe critical thinking is essential for success. In a modern workplace, you cannot afford to sit around like Euthydemus, paralyzed because you can't define profit or Q3 goals with philosophical perfection. You need to act.
That is a valid concern, but action without self-evaluation is dangerous. That is how you get the general who lies to his troops and leads them into a massacre because he never questioned his own assumptions about morale. Socrates described himself as a midwife of ideas, meutix. The birth process is painful, it is messy, but it produces something alive. Your 5-step process produces a report.
It produces a decision. The Mackett source explicitly says critical thinking involves taking a stand for yourself. It is about evaluating evidence and deciding what is accurate. Socrates just tears things down. He exposes contradictions, but, as the source notes, he doesn't always provide definitive answers. In the modern world, we need answers.
I would argue we need better questions. Socrates was executed not because he was useless, but because he was dangerous to the established order. He forced people to look at their unexamined assumptions. If you are building a bridge, yes, use your method. But if you are deciding where to build the bridge, or if a bridge is even the right solution, you need Socrates.
That is an interesting distinction. You are saying my method works for execution, but yours works for strategy.
In a sense. But I'd go further. I think my method is required to generate the options you eventually execute on. This leads us to the mental motion itself, convergent versus divergent thinking.
J.P. Guilford's concepts?
Yes. Divergent thinking is about generating mass quantities of ideas. It is about introducing chaos into the system to see what happens.
And convergent thinking is about narrowing those ideas down to the one that works. It's the immune system that kills the bad ideas.
But you can't narrow down what you haven't generated. There is a fascinating experiment mentioned in the Sprouts material, the murder mystery experiment. I think this proves my point about the necessity of disruption.
I found this study very telling, actually, but I think it supports my view on synthesis.
Let's look at the setup. You have 2 groups trying to solve a murder mystery. Group A is a bunch of friends. They had the same background, same dots to connect. They had a great time, felt effective, enjoyed the process.
Cohesion, efficiency, they spoke the same language.
And Group B was also friends, but the researchers introduced one stranger into the group, someone who didn't fit.
And Group B was uncomfortable. They reported that they didn't like having the stranger there. They felt the process was harder and less effective.
Exactly. It was awkward. But here's the kicker. Group B solved the mystery twice as fast and much more accurately than the happy Group A.
Right.
To me, this is a smoking gun. You need the stranger. You need the disruptive element. You need divergent thinking that challenges the groupthink. The discomfort was a mechanism of success. If you just have friends connecting the same old dots, you feel good, but you fail.
I see the data, but I interpret the mechanism differently. It wasn't just the presence of the stranger that solved the mystery. It was the fact that the group had to synthesize that new perspective. That is convergent thinking. Without the group's ability to take the stranger's input, evaluate it, and converge on a solution, they would have just been awkward and unsolved.
But without the stranger, they were happy and wrong.
Granted, but the solution didn't come from the chaos itself. It came from the management of the chaos. This is why I advocate for things like creative writing as a tool, which Alux mentions. It disciplines the imagination. It's not just random thoughts, it's narrative structure. You are taking the wild ideas and forcing them into a plot. That is convergent thinking. You are imposing order on the stranger.
It is interesting you mentioned discipline because there are different ways to discipline the mind. Jack Mattson from Penn State recommends a different kind of discipline. He recommends you dress for failure.
Which I find to be a bit of a performance art piece rather than a cognitive strategy.
It is cognitive conditioning. By dressing in a way that invites judgment or failure, mismatched shoes, a clown nose, you desensitize yourself to the fear of being wrong. You force a new perspective. You are training your brain to be the stranger in the room.
It seems incredibly inefficient to me. If I walk into a board meeting in a clown suit, I'm not generating insights, I'm generating a visit to HR.
Perhaps, but the point is to lower the stakes so you can take risks in your thinking.
I prefer a different approach. Clayton Christensen from Harvard Business School has much more practical advice, in my opinion. He suggests parents fix things at home themselves.
The DIY approach?
Yes, but think about why. It teaches children that problems have solutions within their grasp, using available resources. It teaches them to connect the dots. They have the tools in the garage, the materials on hand. It empowers them to be adaptive thinkers. I have a broken chair, I have glue, I have a clamp. I can fix this. That is far more valuable than dressing up to feel comfortable with failure.
But what if the chair is broken because the design is fundamentally flawed? The kid with the glue just fixes a bad chair. The kid who isn't afraid of failure, the one who has been dressing for failure, might look at it and say, why don't we sit on beanbags?
And then you have a house full of beanbags and bad posture.
Perhaps, but you have innovation. You have a new way of living. You have moved past the chair entirely.
But that's just it. Most of life is about the chair. We can't reinvent the wheel or the chair every single day. We need stability.
And I say we settle for stability too often. We need to shake the foundations.
We are coming to the end of our time, and I want to try to pull these threads together, because despite our disagreement, we are both trying to solve the problem of how to think better.
Please, try to converge us.
I will. My position stands on the bedrock of reality. The LX source compares the mind to a computer. It collects, processes, and stores information. To operate that computer effectively, you need software. You need the 5-step process. You need to identify patterns. You need to weigh evidence like a judge.
You want a clean, bug-free operating system.
I do. Because in the real world, whether it is fixing a chair or solving a business crisis, you need to eat. You need to cook the rice. You cannot just stare at the coconut and ask, what is a coconut, forever? The goal of questioning assumptions is to clear the debris so you can build a sturdy structure.
And I maintain that the structure is often a prison. We are too quick to connect dots that shouldn't be connected just because they are familiar. The dots are often illusions.
So we should just wander?
We should be willing to wander. We must use the Socratic Method to expose contradictions, even if it leaves us despondent for a moment. True critical thinking is comfortable with the stranger in the room. It welcomes the discomfort. It lights up that executive network by daydreaming about the impossible.
Well, there is one thing I think we can both agree on from the source material.
What is that?
Feeding the mind.
Ah, yes, the fuel.
Whether you are an adapter or an innovator, the machine needs fuel. Reading, meditation, seeking new experiences, Alux mentions that reading stretches the boundaries of the mind. It gives you more dots, even if we disagree in how to use them.
And Mark Schwein suggests saying yes to everything for a week, calling your weird aunt, taking a cold shower. I think we can both endorse the idea that you need input whether you call them dots or disruptions. You can't think critically in a vacuum.
Agreed. You need raw material to work with.
So, to our listeners, we invite you to look at your own assumptions this week. Don't just accept your first thought.
Ask yourself, are you building a better litter box?
Or are you inventing a robot cat?
That is the debate. Thanks for listening.
See you next time.